Hello and welcome to the Voice of Intuition podcast. My name is Susan Jane and I believe that trusting your intuition is the best way to live your life with meaning and purpose. Each week you will hear about how you can connect, develop and trust your intuition through the wonderful array of guests we have on the show and my own personal experiences. Join me to understand how your intuition can guide you towards a life full of meaning and loving purpose.
Hello and welcome to the Voice of Intuition podcast. Sorry, I was just looking down because it looked like my mute button was still on. I wasn't sure if I was here. I'm Susan Jane. Wow, look at that, confused me. I'm Susan Jane and I'm the host of the podcast. Now, today we are talking about self-sabotaging. We're actually talking about imposter syndrome. And I sort of felt a bit like that when I first came on just then. You have this certain feeling, certain belief, certain understanding of how you're supposed to be and what it's supposed to be like. And sometimes we don't always meet that criteria. And so we start feeling a little bit like we're an imposter. But I am definitely not the expert on that. I can only tell you some of my experiences I've had with it. We have got an expert on the imposter syndrome, and she's not long released a new book too. So we're going to find out all about it. But we're gonna really go deep into what it actually is, what it feels like when you're experiencing that, and how we can actually improve that and move forward with it. So it's going to be a great episode. Don't miss out. And remember to share, subscribe and like the podcast so we can get it around to everyone else there too. So with no further ado, I am going to introduce you to Sheryl. Welcome to the podcast, Sheryl.
Thank you so much, Susan. It's great to be here.
We are looking forward to this. We're going to really nail this one. I'm really wanting to get a good understanding of actually what imposter syndrome is, because I've heard it banter around quite a lot, but I'd like to get a really good understanding of it. But before we do that, I want to know a bit more about you. How did you get to do imposter syndrome, for goodness sake?
Well, I certainly didn't start out thinking that I was going to write a book on imposter syndrome. And I'll tell you, I have over 30 years in the business world. So I've been 3-time entrepreneur, you might say. Now I'm 4-time. And I've worked for large corporations, a couple of $2 billion corporations in executive positions, one in the C-suite. And you know, you don't get to the C-suite without having been all the things in the organization. So I've been around the block a few times. And I'll tell you, I didn't have a name or an understanding of some of these symptoms that I would feel. And when I learned about imposter syndrome, I thought, okay, that's it. Wow, there we go. This is what I'm feeling. And I started to get curious and I thought, I just need to figure this out. You know, I need to figure out why I'm experiencing this. And more importantly, how do I get past it?
So you were actually experiencing all this and you didn't quite know what it was. You were going through these feelings, these emotions, and not really knowing what it was. How did you work out that you had this sort of imposter syndrome? I'm getting tongue-tied today, sorry.
Well, you know, it's interesting because over the years, I worked on myself. I've always been into personal development. I'm always very curious. And so I worked through some of it, but I never had a name for it. It was a bit like being in a fog. That's the way I like to describe it. You don't really know why you feel this crippling self-doubt or this anxiety, or where fear sometimes stops you, or you're comparing yourself or going through the rumination. All these things we experience. And I also got so used to experiencing them that I didn't realize how debilitating they were, how much they were draining me, how much they were leading to burnout, and how much they were costing me. I didn't really understand all the costs in my life because I was still pushing through. I was feeling the fear and doing it anyway. I was making things happen. I was still accomplished. And that's one of the big myths of imposter syndrome.
Yes, exactly. It's like people look at you that you've achieved it all. You've accomplished what you want to do. So you're in charge. You're working. You're doing it. Like there's nothing wrong with you. But deep
Right.
down, you've got this feeling that it's not quite working out.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, if you don't mind, I'm going to just break down what it is because I think there's a lot of confusion about what imposter syndrome is. So let me just clarify that to begin. And basically, imposter syndrome is a psychological pattern where somebody feels like they're not good enough despite evidence to the contrary. So, in spite of your accomplishments. So, it's like reality and perception do not match. There's a disconnect. There's a disconnect between our actual accomplishments and how we feel about them. So, someone experiencing imposter syndrome, and this is where it got its name from, might feel like a fraud. It's like, oh, I'm just fooling them. They're going to figure out any time that I'm not who they thought I was, or I'm not as good as they thought I was, which leads to some of the myths around imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome does not really mean you're an imposter. And I've heard that. I mean, I think, okay, of course people know that, but I hear that time and time again. People will say, well, you're not really an imposter, so you can't have imposter syndrome. And it doesn't mean other people think you're an imposter. It's that we feel like we're an imposter. They're called fraudulent feelings or feelings of fraudulence. We feel it, it's internalized, and it becomes kind of a mask we wear. We try to hide and try to perform or be who we think everybody else wants us to be. And even when we're performing and we seem to be very, very confident, I call it kind of the confidence cloak that we put on, and we get really good at that. At least I did. Deep inside, there's the rumination. Oh, what do they really think? There's the comparison, up or down, right? It's up. It's like, I'm never good enough. I'm never as good as that other person. How am I going to measure up? Or when you find somebody that's not as far along as you are, or not as good, you find yourself thinking, oh, good, I'm better than they are, which isn't very nice, is it? It's not the way we really want to think. So we go through all of these emotions in a very maladaptive way. They don't feel good, but we hide them. We learn to hide them. So
Yes.
that's what it is.
And the thing is too, Sheryl, you're talking about in a situation where you're in an office or in corporate, and I can understand how you would have imposter syndrome in that way, but we can get it without being in business, can't we?
Oh, absolutely. Students, huge for students, huge. And they say college, but even in high school, it's always comparing ourselves and the anxiety and the rumination. And am I good enough? And those are the feelings. Am I good enough? Am I worthy? Am I deserving? Does my voice matter? Do I matter? You see, and it can happen in relationships. So a lot of people that aren't in the workplace or in a school setting where they're not constantly comparing themselves from an achievement standpoint don't necessarily identify with imposter syndrome, but they can have some of these fraudulent feelings still in whatever they're doing. But normally we're going to see this in a student setting, as an entrepreneur in business, so I have my business, maybe I'm looking at a competitor or another company or a colleague or whoever it is, or in a business setting. So generally we tend to see it that way. But the reason it's important to understand the feelings is because when you feel like you're not good enough or not worthy or not deserving, it usually, if not almost always, comes from early childhood. So one of the things that I do when I'm helping people with imposter syndrome to overcome it is I take a very holistic approach. It's inside out and outside in. And inside out means going within, looking at those, what we call root causes. Where did this come from? Where did this originate? And when we go back to our childhood, we have to remember that we have experiences. You see, we have beliefs, of course. So a belief of I'm not good enough, or a belief of I'm not worthy, or I don't deserve this, or I was just lucky, you know, or who's going to listen to me? Who cares? Who cares what I have to say? Excuse me. So we might have these beliefs about ourselves, but where do they come from? And they're usually rooted in childhood. And when we go back to childhood, we can be quite young when they start. So we have to also look at that child and say, what was that age and what was that stage? You imagine when a 3-year-old has an experience, it's quite different than a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old or a 12-year-old, right? Or a 15-year-old. Our brains, developmentally, we're just different. Our brains, our conditioning, where we're at in life. And so we go back and we say something happened, we have an experience, and it's not so much the experience, but it's the meaning we gave it, the interpretation we had at that age and at that stage. At that age and at that stage. So let's go back. If you're a parent or an aunt or an uncle, you know that when you see a small child and, for example, they're afraid of the dark or they think there's monsters in the closet, for them it's very real because our imagination is more real than reality. And so for them, it's very real. So if you have a 5-year-old that's afraid of the dark, the 12-year-old might say, oh, that's so silly. But it's not silly to the 5-year-old. So it's the same kind of thing. Something happens, mommy gets angry and she yells. And the 5-year-old might take it as mommy's angry, it's all my fault. Or mommy yelled at me and said I shouldn't do that. I'm not good enough. Or mommy took something away from me. I don't deserve that. You see, and children always feel that they're the ones that have caused everything. It's because of them. So when things happen in the outside world, they tend to think, especially with our parents, we tend to think it's our fault. Mm-hmm. So yeah. And there's more to this. There's a lot to the childhood piece of this, but you see, our brains are wired. And this is kind of our primitive wiring to protect us, to look for any kind of a threat. So we're very quick to perceive what could be a threat or negative, and we give that more weight. And that is still kind of goes back, hundreds of years, if that not thousands, to, our primitive selves that needed to, our cave, the caveman that needed to watch out for threats. And so we give more weight to the negative. We're more attuned to anything that could be a threat. And then we also look for anything to make ourselves right. So we want to be right. So our mind will filter out things in order to make us right. And so this will happen even with the negative. So if I've gone through an experience a few times and my belief is I'm not good enough, then anytime something happens, I filter things out to say, oh, there it is. You see, I really am not good enough. And that starts to layer and layer and layer and take on even more weight. And it can be really deep down in our subconscious mind. So consciously we can know, hey, I am good enough. I wrote this book, or I got this degree, or I gave this presentation, or whatever that was. People were happy. People were, telling me how great it was. But deep inside, there's another voice that says that wasn't really good. You were just lucky. They're just saying that to make you feel better. Or maybe you did it this time, but you'll never do it again. You were just lucky that time. And so we have that tendency to go back to that deep adverse, they call it adverse childhood experience. And the way to remember that is with the acronym ACE. So adverse childhood experience, ACE. And so, you go back to that. That's the inside out part of this.
Wow. Okay. I really like how you've explained that. One of the other things that popped into my mind when you were sort of saying that, because we were looking at sort of the corporate world or school. I know mothers will turn around and go, I don't know what I'm doing.
Absolutely.
And mothers will often have, and straight away my mind went to, oh gosh, I can remember starting to raise my kids and thinking, I have no idea what I'm doing. I feel like an imposter. I feel like I'm supposed to know what I'm doing, but I don't have any idea of it.
Yeah. Now, when the way that is imposter syndrome is when we really do know, and we're still saying to ourselves, I have no idea. And yet I do. I know, I'm experienced. So being a beginner, being a new mom doesn't mean you have imposter syndrome because you have a little bit of doubt or you really aren't sure yet. It just means you're on a learning curve and you're supposed to have that doubt, just like you're learning anything that's new. So being a new mom or being a beginner at anything isn't imposter syndrome. It's imposter syndrome when you have kids, you've been raising kids, you've been doing a great job. Sure, there's uncertainty. Sure, things come up. Sure, there are times where it's like, I haven't seen this before, which is often with being a parent, I know. But there's, this, generally speaking, an adaptive way to deal with that is, you know what, I can figure this out. It's all right. Kids are kids. I can just have a conversation with them. I can Google something. I can call a friend. I can get some help. They're going through something and it will be okay.
Oh, that's perfect, because that is a really good and a very clear understanding of the difference, because sometimes we may feel like we're an imposter or we're in that frame, but the reality is we're not. We're just beginners.
Right. We're just beginners. There's something new. Right. So we don't want to confuse having a little bit of a lack of confidence or a little bit of self-doubt or a little bit of fear with imposter syndrome. And that's what I see happen a lot. People say, I have self-doubt, therefore I have imposter syndrome. So just if you can remember that imposter syndrome there's a disconnect, right? It's a psychological pattern. So the emphasis is on the word pattern. It's continual, it's patterned, where we feel like we're not good enough or we're not worthy or we're not deserving, despite evidence to the contrary. So it tends to apply more to accomplished and highly accomplished people. So somebody's very accomplished, think Albert Einstein, Maya Angelou, Steve Martin, Tina Fey, Oprah Winfrey, Michelle Obama, the list goes on and on. Something like 80 to 85% of people are experiencing this. And they're highly accomplished. And so it doesn't mean that it's just a beginner's phenomenon. It doesn't mean that you're actually an imposter or anyone thinks you're an imposter. It's that we feel like we're the imposter. And it also doesn't mean that feel your fear and do it anyway is the antidote, because it's not just fear. Highly accomplished people have done that, obviously. They feel the fear, they do it anyway, but they may come out the other side with a little more confidence. But if they're still feeling that disconnect, like that really wasn't me, I can't do it again, I'm going to be exposed at any time, there is that disconnect between perception and reality. And that's where imposter syndrome lies. It lies within, and it lies within because you are accomplished. It's not true, you see. So that's kind of the double entendre, the double meaning for the book. The imposter lies within. And the pattern part is also really important, Susan, because remember I talked about there's an inside out and an outside in approach to getting past imposter syndrome. And by the way, most people say, and this really bothers me, but most people will say that you can't get past imposter syndrome. Everybody has it, and you just have to live with it. You have to learn some really good coping skills. That's what I hear time and time again. And I disagree with that. I firmly, 100% disagree with that. But I will tell you that if you believe that will be your reality. If you say I can't, I promise you can't. If you say I can, I promise you can. So what happens with imposter syndrome is this: we're experiencing these feelings and we feel like we're the only one. We feel like nobody else could possibly relate to this. I've got to hide this. I can't let anybody know. And then we learn that something like 80 to 85% of people are experiencing this. And so the pendulum swings. It goes from no one has it to everyone has it. But that's not true either. Because if 80, let's just say 80% or 85% of people experience imposter syndrome, that means that 15 to 20% of people don't. So what's going on with that 15 to 20%? What is going on with them that is different than the other 80 to 85%? That's what I'd like to know, right? And so if they do not experience, and I never say have, and I never say struggle, and I never say suffer, I always say experience, because our subconscious mind is always listening, and those are very loaded words. So I always say experience, because experience is something that kind of feels like it's easier to get past. So what are they experiencing that is different than the other 80 to 85%? Do you see what I mean? It's really, really important. Because I really believe that impossibility, if you say, okay, it's possible that I'm not sure I believe it completely, but I'm going to say, okay, Sheryl, it's possible. Well, possibility is enough, because possibility leads to probability, and probability leads to inevitability. You can get past it. You just have to be stubborn like I was and say, how do I figure this out? So the second half of that holistic equation is inside out and outside in, because, and again, I have this neuroscience background, the brain is patterned. Our brain creates neurological, or what they call actually neural pathways. And it's just the way for our brain to be very efficient. So when we do something over and over again, we tend to go on autopilot, right? Our brain makes the neurons connect, and it kind of goes down, and we just do it on autopilot. Like, say you're driving somewhere and you end up somewhere that you normally go, even when you weren't planning to go there. You just kind of do it on autopilot. But something that a lot of people don't realize is that our beliefs, our thoughts, and our self-talk are also all patterned. We create neural pathways for these things. So we need to pay attention to them. And so the outside-in approach is a more mindful approach. It's taking the unconscious and making it conscious, changing those patterns through, behavior and habit form, rehabiting or repatterning them long enough that we create new neural pathways and we strengthen them, and then we can make that unconscious. So we bring the unconscious conscious, we switch it up, and then we make that unconscious again. So that's the kind of high level outside in approach to getting past imposter syndrome. So hopefully that makes sense, because there's something else that I think is really, really critical that I'd like to share.
Yeah, can I just ask a question first, Sheryl?
Yeah.
It's probably more about how we are getting like imposter syndrome. I'm sort of listening to what you're saying and sort of reflecting back on myself. And one of the things I wanted to sort of check with you is, okay, so I've written a book and I run an international podcast, and I was nominated Australian Citizen of the Year 100 years ago, and all these different things. I'm just wondering, is it to do with the weight of the worth? So when you say you're an author, how we weight that to ourselves, or how we weight the worth of that, is that part of this imposter syndrome? Now let me explain it this way. I do things and people say, oh wow, that's amazing, and I sort of go, no, not really, it's just anyone can do it. Like, I don't see the value or the weight of the worth for it. So when I talk about the different things I've done in my life and how people sort of react to those different things, I can brush them off pretty quickly, because to me it was not really a big deal, but for somebody else it is a big deal. And so when I start to look at this imposter syndrome, is it to do with the weight of the worth? Is it to do with how we weight what that is worth? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. And what I would say is that is more of the behavior, the observable behavior, right? The observable thought is, I don't think that's that big of a deal. I'm not going to give that accomplishment much weight, whatever it is, because I don't feel that I'm that worthy. So if I give it too much weight, that's really not me. That doesn't make sense to me, to who I am inside. That is the imposter lying within, because the imposter is telling you you're not worthy. You're not good enough. You don't deserve this. Do it, keep doing it, but kind of like, okay, you did that, but then, all right, who cares what's next? And we never get that satisfaction. We never get to just say,
Yeah.
wow, yay me. And if we do, it's like, yay me for a moment. And then it's like, next. I can never get to the next thing fast enough, because I always feel like I need to achieve more, do more, be more. That's kind of this superhero complex. That's one of the archetypes I talk about. So yes, that is usually weighted in childhood, somewhere along the way. Little Sheryl or little Susan or little whoever we were, our child, but we were that child, right?
Mm.
Felt like we weren't good enough. We felt like that value, there wasn't the value for us who we are, therefore not for the things that we put out into the world. And so when we can get to those, and this is the part that is so transformational, so powerful. This is why I got into hypnotherapy. This is, why I like to work with the subconscious mind, and I do this worldwide. I work with people all over the world, believe it or not, just via Zoom. And it's because we can get to those root causes and we can change them at the origin point, and it remodels all the way through the timeline, and it just shifts people's reality. But it's also important to repattern the thoughts and the self-talk and reset the beliefs, choose new beliefs, and set those in, right? Set those neural pathways in. So I do believe I'm worthy. I've shifted now, and I have done the work. And I do believe, that I am worthy. And I do believe I am proud of my accomplishments. And, I don't belittle them. I don't inflate them either. That's maladaptive as well, to overinflate. It's again that pendulum swing.
Yeah.
But this brings me to this concept that I developed, because I was really curious, and I was just thinking, how do I explain this? Because people would say, well, does getting past imposter syndrome mean no fear? Does it mean no doubt? Does it mean I stopped comparing myself? Does it mean all this is gone? Wouldn't that be great? And I say no, because these are all human behaviors and emotions, right? Fear is wired into us, and we want fear. We need fear. Fear keeps us safe. Fear gives us this amazing adrenaline rush, and it fuels us. It gets us out of bed. It's kind of like the stress response, right? So in what I call the healthy zone, think of like kind of a circle, like a zone, right? And so in a zone, because we're not stagnant, things are going to change, and that pendulum is swinging and it's kind of rocking over the zone, and things happen. We get a little bit of fear. In that zone, it's healthy. As long as there's a beginning and an end, it's contextual. We can understand it. We use it to our advantage. Doubt. Do we want no doubt? It sounds good, but doubt is our discernment muscle, right? Doubt. Can you imagine having no doubt? You would actually believe the real imposters. So you want a little bit of doubt. You want to listen to that doubt. You want to listen a little bit to the judgment and pay attention, and then figure out what works, what doesn't work, but in the healthy zone. Comparison. How do we know who we are if we don't know who we aren't, right? So if I walk into a room and there are a bunch of people in there, and I don't know what their background is and how senior they are, and what they bring to the table. Maybe they bring more than I do in some areas. Maybe I can bring more in other areas. maybe I have my expertise, but if I don't have that basis of comparison, I'm at a loss. So we know who we are. We know light because of dark. We know day because of night, right? We know things through comparison. It's part of our superpower. And we need stress. We just need stress to be a finite cycle. I talk a lot about burnout also. And so this is really important. In the healthy zone, stress is actually good. So these are things that I like everyone to understand. Where am I outside of the healthy zone? And how far, how maladaptive is this? What are the stories I've been telling myself? Where do those beliefs come from? But most importantly, where are my blind spots? I went through life telling myself that my people pleasing just meant that I was a nice person. It was a good thing. But I wasn't setting boundaries. I was putting myself last in my own life. I ended up with resentment, and I didn't understand that it not only was it not good for me, it wasn't good for the other people that I was interacting with in that way. In my perfectionism, my story was, you know what? I'm doing really good work. We'll just go back for the 28th or the 300th iteration and it will get even better. And I never knew when to let go. Everything had to be perfect, right? And I was so hard on myself that I would miss out on life. And I would stay up late at night ruminating, worrying about that smallest flaw. And not just letting go and letting myself be imperfectly perfect, human, So these are the things that we need to recognize in ourselves. I realized that I don't need to save the world. I don't need to be the one to always come to the rescue and take care of everyone, which was a model I saw with my father, right? He was the savior. And I've just learned I don't have to be the savior. I don't have to be the superhero. I don't have to have the expertise in everything I do. I can say, I don't know, or let me find out. And that's okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And it took me a long time to get through that feeling of unworthiness or I don't deserve it. It does take a while to get through it. You do need to really work on yourself. But before we go any further, I do want to let everybody know about your website because it is Sheryl and Jeanette. So it's SHERYL, Sheryl, ANJANETTE.com. Now I'm saying that so the podcasters can hear because I have it going on the ticker tape all the time, but it's not necessarily what they can see. So with your book, and I've got that going on the ticker tape now, which is called The Impostor Lies Within. And it says, silence your inner critic, tame your fear, unleash your badassery. But what I really like about it is how you've actually got the cover, because the word lies has that double meaning, as you were saying. So the imposter lies within, it's laying there within you, but it also lies as in tells fibs.
That's right. The imposter is a liar.
Yes. And so I want to know more about the book because it looks really cool.
I wrote this book almost like a workbook. You'll notice there are more than 20 exercises throughout the book. And if you do the exercises, they really, really work. So I always encourage people to get the hardback or the paperback, not just the Kindle, because you're going to want to highlight it and dog ear it and go back. And the other thing about the book is that, and this makes it very useful, is it really takes you, it's a deep dive. So it's very full, but it takes you through a process. And the process is this. This is my signature methodology, if you will. But we always start with awareness because we don't know what we don't know, even when we think we do. So we have to start with that awareness. That wasn't even on my radar. I didn't even know what imposter syndrome was. If I'd known, I might have been able to do something about it. But now we know on the grander scale, we need the insight. We need to be able to say, how is this affecting me? how is this affecting you? It's going to be different for you than it is for me. So you may see more perfectionist tendencies and more, trying to go out there and, be the Lone Ranger, whatever that is, where I might find myself more in the people pleasing and the savior and the superhero behaviors. And actually, I talk about 7 of them, and I've experienced all 7. So I have a lot of people that.
Can I just go for a sec, Sheryl, because you're talking about those the 7 what you've got called them archetypes.
The 7 archetypes, yes.
Now, is that in the free quiz about the imposter syndrome?
That's not part of the quiz. That's in the book.
Oh, okay, cool. But there is, if they are unsure about it, there is a free quiz on your website. But
there is a quiz, and there's a self-sabotage quiz as well, because I do a voyage past self-sabotage. So I actually take people through this. But yeah, it's just a way for you to kind of get a sense of how it is showing up for you. Yeah, so it's really powerful. But the idea is that if you go from awareness to insight, in the insight, that's where you're really saying, all right, now I know in a broad way, because it's a broad topic, but this is how it's showing up for me. This is how I am self-sabotaging. There's a whole section on self-sabotage. These are the ways that I self-sabotage. And then you have that insight. Now, this is where a lot of people stop, right? Now they have the awareness. Now they have the insight, but they don't take action. And the next 2 stages are critical. This is where things really transform and change, because the next stage is alignment. And so I take you through and help you to get that now into alignment, right? Where things are off, where you're in the maladaptive zone, right? To bring that back and align it, and then to really embody it and integrate it. So the last phase is integration. And the integration is really important because, have you ever tried to change a habit and you do it for a while and then you slide right back into the old ways? So the integration is really, really important. We need to get aligned, and then we need to practice this enough that it just becomes who we are.
And that is so important too. I've seen it so many times where people sort of go, oh, so that's what I am. And they get that insight, but they don't continue forward. Why would you learn what archetype you are if you're not going to actually do something about it? And I mean, it's not bad being that particular archetype. It is a great awareness, but we need to keep on going. We need to start to put some action into place. So with your book, how have you got it structured? Have you got it structured in the where you understand what it is, and then the archetypes, and then the how to go forward with it?
Let me see if I can show you. I really get into this mind map. Can you see that kind of? Well, there we go.
Hang on, let me go full screen.
Let me see if that is showing. So you see the parts are awareness. I don't know if that lights.
Yeah, that's all right. Awareness, you can do insight.
And then as it gets into each of the parts, actually, there's an introduction, and you'll see. Let me see if I can show you the table of contents.
So,
for example, phase 1, there's Impostor Syndrome Unmasked. Imposter Lies is chapter 2. Where do I fit in? The costs, and a holistic approach. So that's your awareness phase. And then the phase 2 is insight, the subconscious mind, the healthy zone that I just talked about, the mind stack. So I really show you how the layers of the mind stack up and how they interplay. And the sandbox, which is beliefs, feelings, and thoughts at play, the fear equation. So we have to talk about fear, right? And that's all in insight. Then when we get into alignment, we get into the habit connection. Very, very powerful chapter. That chapter is about twice as long as any other chapter. Then there's this is inner child healing. So this is the child within and without. Chapter 13 is when self-sabotage happens. Chapter 14 is about confidence. And chapter 15 is Impostor Syndrome at Work. That's another real hefty chapter. And then we get into integration. Integration is beliefs uncovered, the thought tracker, self-talk and the inner critic, inspired to rewire, and then complete-ish. And I would say complete-ish because we are never complete.
Yes, yeah, there's always more we can do, isn't there? Oh,
Yeah.
that's fantastic. And I like how you've structured that out. That's it makes it easy to follow and easy to understand. So, which is really good because I think in this chat we've got a clearer understanding of, we may think we've got imposter syndrome, but we may not have it. And then there's other times where we think we may not have it, but we could.
So we don't ever really have it because we don't want to own it, right?
Yes, that's true. That's
It's
what
not a
we do.
label. We
Yeah.
don't want to own it. We want to see it. And this is a choice. I'm not saying you have to do this. Nobody has to do anything. But I'd like to invite people to just switch up this. Actually, there are a few words to switch up. One is when you have something, even if it's a disease, instead of saying, I have whatever it is, imposter syndrome, which is not a disease, it's a syndrome, or acne or asthma or cancer or anything, just say, I'm experiencing this. Would you like to heal from it? Would you like to let it go? We experience things and we have a lot of past experiences that we're not experiencing anymore today. Easier to let go, right? I also use the word experience instead of the word struggle. Rather than saying, I'm struggling with this, I say, I'm experiencing this right now. I'm experiencing some frustration. What am I going to do with that frustration? That's a feeling. What can I do with that? By the way, this is something I learned from Jim Rohn. You can turn frustration into fascination. Isn't that fascinating?
Mhm.
And then I don't suffer. I'm experiencing this. Even the worst thing, and I know this is hard for some people because when you're really suffering, you're suffering. It's not that you're not. So it's really a choice. It's really for you. But if you are really suffering and you can tell your subconscious mind, if you could switch that word to, I'm experiencing this, you might notice that your whole nervous system calms down and says, okay, this is an experience. I'm going to get through it. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. I may not see it yet, but it's there. And it's easier to dip into faith, which is the belief that we don't have evidence for. And, get that resilience to stick with it.
Yes, because experience has got a time frame to it, whereas hasn't. Suffering
Yeah.
hasn't. There's no time frame. Experience has got a perceived time frame.
Perceived time frame, exactly.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. We're running out of time now, so we're going to have to say goodbye. Is there anything else you'd like to finish off before we go?
For anyone listening, I just want to say this, and I want you to really hear it. I want you to just stop what you're doing for a moment and listen to my voice. You are good enough. You are so much more than good enough. You're amazing. You are worthy. You are deserving. Your voice matters. In fact, we need your voice. Your voice matters so much that it could shift or save a life. So please raise your voice. We need you. And you matter. You would not be here if you did not matter. So please remember that.
Oh, that was lovely. Thank you so much. And thank you for being on the show.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, Susan. What a beautiful show. And I appreciate you in the future on the other side of the world.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it's going to be a beautiful day for you tomorrow. I can see it already.
Good.
Stay on the line. I have a chat with you when I'm finished. And hang on, I've got to go solo layout. Press this button, guys. Have a look at the website. You'll really enjoy it. And it's got Sheryl's books on there, and I just like how she's used that terminology. The imposter lies within. It is so true. It is so very, very true. Not only is it in there and it's there all the time, but it's also telling you fibs. We don't want to know that. We've got to get a better understanding of it to get through that. So, you know, join up with Sheryl. I have to say goodbye. That is the end of the show. Share and like, subscribe to the show so you don't miss out. And we will see you next week. Is that all I had to tell you? Yep, that's it. Beautiful. Okay, bye for now.